turn to Ruth chapter 1, and we will continue our series in Ruth. I've really enjoyed this. I just like biblical narrative better than, say, the epistles of Paul. Not that I dislike them, but it's just kind of easier to preach from. I just enjoy the stories kind of tell themselves in a way. But this is our fourth sermon in Ruth. And we're going to go back a little bit here. We're only going to go a few verses ahead of where we ended last week. But I'm going to step back, and we're going to look at Naomi again today. We looked at her 3 weeks ago. And I want to look at kind of what's happening with her in a transformation. Because I think, like many people, Naomi got to a point in her life where she felt like, my life, as I know it, is over. And have you ever gotten to that point? You know, you ever get to that point where you just think like, I thought my life was going to go a certain way. It was going to play out in this way, and it just didn't. And it's something we struggle with. It's something where, you know, like John just said when he was up here, he's like, you know, my personality type likes to just, this is the way it's going to be, and it's laid out. And when things deviate from that, I'm not, you know, some people get nervous. Just before the service, we were having issues with our television. And so we didn't have any words at all in the first service. And so to me, I'm just like, should we just do completely different songs? You know, just like 3 minutes before service starts. And I'm good with that. I was like, I'll do it, and everyone else was like, no. Just, it's just like, this is the way we had it planned out. And I know that in my life too, though, I'm a person who many times in my life thought this is the way my life is going to go and needs to go and should go and deserves to go. And then something happens that absolutely throws that out of whack, right? You know, we think sometimes, like we look and we think, is my life over the way I saw it? And I don't mean that you have a terminal disease, but it's just that maybe a dream is dead. You had a way you thought life would be. It's just not going to be that way. It could have been many points in your life. I think it happens to kids. I think it happens to teenagers. I think it happens to adults. I remember one of the most traumatic things in my life was when I moved, when I was in 9th grade. And some of you know this story, but like I grew up in New York City. And we moved to one of the suburbs, about an hour north of New York City. And when we did that, it was the Thursday before Thanksgiving. And I just thought that, I would go to my new school and everyone would think I was awesome and cool, and I would just make all sorts of friends. And it turned out to be completely different than that. And I became a really unhappy kid. I was ahead a year in some classes. So I was like this hybrid, like freshman, sophomore. So, a lot of the freshmen looked at me and they're like, that's the kid who's like all in the sophomore classes. And you know how kids are. Like in high school, it's like, you're a junior, man. If a sophomore sat at your lunch table, it's like, it's just like, you can't cut in here. And then, and then I was in sophomore classes and everyone's like, oh, you're like the little kid, the little freshman. And so it was I just had the hardest time. I mean, some of the people who befriended me the most were all the ones who had like their black Iron Maiden t-shirts on, and then Queensryche and different things like that. And my school had a smoking section. Yes, it did. You had to go outside. It was outside like one of the doors, and you go out there and smoke. And that's where a lot of I didn't smoke. I would just push my face against the window and watch them. But they would go out there and they would smoke. And I remember when I switched schools, they made me take French in the 7th and 8th grade. And it was like, it counted as high school credit for like French 1. And I wanted to be in Spanish. Like, no, you need to be in French. So as soon as I started high school, I took Spanish. Of course, when I switched schools in the middle of 9th grade, they couldn't fit me in a Spanish 1 class. So they're like, we're going to put you in French 1. Like, this is my 3rd year. And they're like, yeah, it's going to be your 3rd year in French 1. And I remember my teacher saying, you have the most excellent pronunciation. Like, this is the 3rd time I'm doing most of this. And it was I was just so miserable. And I remember, I won't belabor the story, and it was pretty serious. Just the hurt in my heart. But I remember a few weeks later after moving, we went to a Christmas tree lot. And I think it was the first year we were going to get a real Christmas tree. We always had like an artificial one. And if I may remember that right, or maybe remember it wrong, but we went to the lot. It was me and my dad and my sister. And my dad kept holding up trees and turning them around. He's like, what do you think? And my sister was like my sister didn't want to move, Nancy. She didn't want to move, and then she had the best time, after we moved. And I was like the exact opposite. And I remember like my dad's kind of turning the trees around, and Nancy's just like, oh, it's great, everything's great. Yeah. She was just happy about everything at that time. And me, I'm like, no, not that one. And I still remember my father just said to me, he got really frustrated with me. And he's like, what do you want? He's like, what is it you need? What is it you want? And I said to him, I just want to go home. And my dad said to me, okay, we just won't get a tree today. We'll go back home. I was like, no, I mean home to the Bronx. And I don't want to be here. And we just had a blow up right there in the Christmas tree lot. And needless to say, we didn't get a tree that day. And so for me, it was just like, I was 14 years old, and I'm just thinking like, I thought this is how things were going to go. And I remember Amy she was talking about this recently. I remember her saying this years ago. When she was, I think, 13, her dad left. And her parents got divorced shortly after that. And Amy just said, I didn't tell anybody for over a year. Like, I pretended like my parents were still married to all of my friends. She's like, because I didn't want to deal with that. And I didn't want people to know, and I was just, embarrassed by it. And it's like, this isn't how it's supposed to happen. Like, all my other friends, their parents are married, and mine aren't. And I don't want to tell them. I think back to just a little over 10 years ago, before I started the church. I wouldn't say I was depressed. I would say I was severely discouraged about a lot of things concerning life. Where, I had worked in the ministry, and I was let go from my job. I eventually found out I was really severely lied to about it, and I was someone. If you don't know my story, I was in a PhD program at Duke University, and to get a PhD in chemistry, and I was working on making biocompatible materials, like to help treat diabetes and corneal tears and substitutes for stitches and things like that. And I loved it. I enjoyed it so much. And God called me into the ministry. And I left there. I kind of dropped out, took my master's degree, and I came here. I went to Hiles-Anderson College over here in Crown Point. And and that was a hard decision. It was a hard decision, but at the same time, I felt like this is what God wants me to do, and I'm moving on. And then here I am, 10 years later, and I had gone to seminary, and I had worked in the ministry, and I suddenly didn't have this ministry job, and it was just all these questions to start kind of like, man, did I waste my time doing this? Did I waste my time coming here? Like, should I have just stayed the course with Duke, and should I have just finished my PhD and made a bunch more money? And I mean, one day I had a God was so kind to us during that time in providing, and like I lost my job just maybe 10 weeks before my daughter was born, and she was born like 3 weeks premature, and she had to stay in the hospital for a while, and I was. A lab I worked at part-time, the next day after I lost my job, they're like, oh, you can have a full-time job. And they gave me a full-time job, but it wasn't like, up to snuff or par with my educational experience in chemistry. And so I was always looking for a job. And I remember one day I had applied for a job. It was out a little past Valparaiso at a company that made like chemical gases. And so I did like phone interviews, and I went in for an interview, and everything went great. And they took me around, and they were like introducing me as like the next manager of this one department to people. And I'm thinking, that didn't give me a job offer yet. They're like, they're introducing me. And so they're like, okay, at the end of the day, they said probably tomorrow or Friday. I think it was a Wednesday. They said tomorrow or Friday, our manager or our what's it called? Personnel, whatever it's called, human resources. We'll call you, and they will, they'll give you the formal offer and all that stuff. So they call me Friday, and the lady's like, she goes, I don't know how to say this. Like the strangest thing happened, and that they decided not to even fill this job, and they're going to eliminate it. And I was devastated. I mean, I thought like, that was my job, and that was going to be, like how I kind of redeemed myself or restored myself, if you will, and kind of made up for the lost years. And then it just seemed like I was like, no, God wants me to be in a ministry. And I kept thinking, and I won't go into the story, but all sorts of things happened that made me think I was going to go back to the East Coast, which is what I always wanted to do. Go back to the East Coast and start a church there or work in a church there. And it was just like every one of those opportunities and situations fell through. And I would just sit there and think like, God, is this it? Like, is this what I'm going to be and what I'm going to do? Is, it's like I gave up the life I thought I was going to have for you in chemistry. And then it's like, here I am, God, and I've sacrificed and laid down my life, and this is it. Like this is all it is. It seemed like such a waste of my life. And people, you think your life is over. Maybe you got cheated on. Maybe you're divorced. Maybe you thought your life was over when your sin was found out by others. Maybe you thought it was over when you had financial ruin or disease or disappointment. And just the way we think life's going to go sometimes, it doesn't play out that way. And some people just need that, like a glimpse of hope in life, in marriage, in outlook, in prospects. But even then, sometimes you look at the future and you wonder if it's just over, if you ruined it, and you sit there and you kill yourself, asking questions like, what could I have done differently? What could have happened if I had done this one thing? What could I have been if I didn't do this one thing? How did I get to this point where I feel like I did everything I should have? Yes, I've made some mistakes, but mistakes don't seem to go away from me the way they do for other people. Or you sit there and you rack your brain over, what if I had stayed where I was? What if I had tried something else instead? What if I had never, whatever? What if I had just said whatever? What if I had just spoken up? What if I had just given in and avoided conflict? What if I had just held in my anger? What if I had put myself out there and gave more effort? And you sit there and you just think through, like, why did it end? Where did it go wrong? Why did it go wrong? How come that person couldn't understand? Why couldn't that person see? Why do they lie? Why do they cling to a lie? Why did they leave? Why did they cheat? Why did they scam me after I trusted them? Why did they say all those things and not mean any of them? And you sit there and think, am I going to be trapped like this forever? Why is my life as I've known it over? Why are my dreams crushed? Why is my hope gone? Why is my optimism gone? I used to be happy. And last of all, why did not God fix this? And today we're going to look at a little bit in chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Ruth at someone who truly could have said, my life is over. The life Naomi knew was over, so was Ruth's, but we're going to look at Naomi. And yet, in these 3 chapters, what you'll see is there's a spark of hope, and her outlook changes as she realizes something very important. It was, Naomi, your life is not over. And yours isn't either. There's a life you can have. I think it's going to be an awesome and improved life of walking with God, walking in the Spirit. It's not the life you dreamed it would be. It doesn't fulfill it may not fulfill your current expectations or your past expectations. But if you walk the path to restoration that God lays out, you're going to find it's better. As the author of Hebrews said, he said, you had compassion on me in my chains, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods, knowing that you have a better and an enduring substance or possession for yourselves in heaven. He said, I know you do things that seem like they're hard and even crippling in your life, but you do it because you know there's something better someday. And I think for any Christian, God is writing a comeback story. It's a redemption story where there's hope. But so often in our quietest hours, we relive pain, we feel the pain, and we can lay in bed or whenever you get alone and you can relive defeat and feel the sorrow and hurt and anger just like it's happening all over again. Just like it wasn't a long time ago, like it's happening right now. And you're finding out right now that something happened that is devastating your life. I think sometimes I think of David, King David in Psalm 6. He said, I am weary with my groaning. All night long I make my bed to swim. I water my couch with my tears. And the question is, how do you make it back to happiness? How do you make it back to joy and to restoration? And how do you make it back to feeling like in a room full of people, you don't have to hold your head lower and you don't have to feel inferior to others? How do you make it back when you thought your life is over the way you knew it? And when I say make it back, I don't mean your diminished version of make it back. I don't mean what you have to settle for. I don't mean your vision of having the same status you once had, the same health you once had, the same body you once had, the same respect you once had. That'll all fade anyway. I'm talking about make it back in the spiritual sense first, and then all the tangible material benefits that accompany it, because God is just so wonderful and kind and blessing us. So let's look at Naomi in Ruth 1:1. And we're going to skip around. We're going to go in sequential order, but we'll read some verses and go ahead, and I'm going to make some points from this. But Ruth 1:1. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab, and they continued there. And we talked 3 weeks ago. That was probably not a good idea, right? And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. And we talked 2 weeks ago about they shouldn't have done that according to the law. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they dwelled there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. Right? And then Naomi arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, right, she has a change of mind, go, return each to your mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you've dealt with the dead and with me. So Naomi had left, and her family had left Bethlehem, Judah, her husband, her 2 sons, to find food in the enemy's land. And her husband dies, her sons die. She hears how God has been very kind to Israel and ended the famine, and she heads back to the place that she left with her 2 daughters-in-law. So when she changes her mind and tells them to go back to their mother's house, she invokes the Lord's name in a blessing. But I think I can prove to you from the Bible, and I'll show you in a little bit, I think those were completely vain words coming out of her mouth, right? And that is a trait of Christians who often feel that their life is over, who are going through a struggle, through depression, through just recalibrating and trying to figure out where they are in life. And it's very characteristic of people to be like Christians, to be like that when they think life is over and it'll never be the same. And God might be on your lips because some of you, because that's what you're supposed to do. And some of you grew up in Christian culture and you know Christian code words and you know how to make people think that everything's okay and you have no problems. But you're not filled with God's joy. You don't have the peace of God that surpasses understanding to guard your heart, like Philippians 4:7 says. You're not committed to him. You're committed to yourself, to your anger, to your grief, to your feelings. You say, just like Naomi wasn't. How do I know? Look at verse 15. She said, right after Orpah leaves, she looks at Ruth and she says, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law, right? Yeah. I don't think she's very devoted to the Lord if she's encouraging people to go after their own gods, right? If she's just sitting there saying like, oh, just go back to your gods and all that, and I'll just go back to my home. I don't think she's truly in her heart devoted to the Lord, right? She doesn't care about God. She doesn't care about Orpah's spiritual life. She's angry at God. She says his name, but in truth, she doesn't care if her daughter-in-law rejects the one true God and returns to false gods, right? Is that what you're like at times? You know, your relationship with God isn't very healthy, really breathing, and maybe you're angry at him, you question him, but you're here and you're walking the Christian walk because that's what you're used to doing, right? If you are, I commend you for sticking with it, right? You have to give Naomi credit. She did return, right? She returned to the place where God was, to his nation, to his people. So when you see and you feel like, man, I feel like my life is over, I'd say the first thing you need to do is return or turn to the one true God. That didn't restore everything for Naomi, but it was the start of her comeback and her restoration, because her life was not over. It's sad to think, but it's true that God often has to use hardship to get us to even notice how far we've drifted from Him. I don't even know if it's right to say God uses hardship as much as it is He just lets sin run its course. And you say, okay, well, what do I return? Well, obviously to church, you're here, right? Do that. But not just being here in body, but being part of the body. You return to Him, and you habitually pick up your Bible and read it and listen to it and listen to sermons, but make sure you're reading it. And do you pray? Do you need to return to the basic things of walking with God? Your life is not over, and you can start restoring it and reclaiming it by returning to God, even if you don't feel it or feel like it. That's a big thing. A lot of people feel like, I don't feel like doing that. It doesn't feel like anything's being accomplished. I doubt that Naomi felt like going back to Bethlehem, Judah. I doubt she was real excited about having to go back there and say, my 10-year plus journey was a complete and utter failure. I've lost everything. All right, verse 19. So they too went until they came to Bethlehem, and it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem that all the city was moved about them. And they said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said unto them, "Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, which means bitter, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?" If you think your life is over, can you do this? Can you look truth in the face? I mean, just this. Can you see the spin Naomi puts on this story? The Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. Like she's blaming God. Do you ever contemplate consequences? Right? Is it ever your fault? Sometimes people just need to take stock of their situation. And yes, I know the other person did A and B and C, but what did you do to contribute to it? What did you do to contribute to the failure, to the breakdown? And what happens a lot of times is we as Christians, man, we ought to be the first people to say, I did wrong. I did wrong. I see it. And no matter what, if Bob and I had a blow up, right, and I called him some sort of name, and then all of a sudden Bob just freaks out and he comes and starts swinging at me, and he goes and he gets in his big truck and he rolls over my new car, and then it's like, what'd you call me, right? You'd look at that and think like, he's nuts. But you know what? Maybe I shouldn't have called him a name. And I know we look at those things sometimes and we're like, everything everyone else did is like very big. And maybe what I did is like that. Well, maybe you catalyzed something. Maybe you triggered something. And sometimes we're so slow to look at our part in it. But here's Naomi. God did this to me. God hates me. God has dealt bitterly with me. And people do that. They look at God. Why are you doing this to me, God? How can Naomi say that? She's the one who left. Right? She's the one who her and her family, they got up and left. Can you look truth in the face? How about this one? Naomi says, "I went out full, and the Lord brought me home empty." Again, she blames God, but is what she said true? Did she come home empty? How do you think Ruth feels standing there? Right? I mean, she brings her daughter-in-law back with her. And it's just like, man, I went out with everything. Now I have nothing. Look at her. She's nothing. And here she is. It's like, how do you think Ruth feels as Naomi gives her drama queen monologue to this crowd? And it's like, you look at Naomi's actions and words, and if you're someone who just feels like, man, I thought my life was over and I'm trying to rebuild, let me say two things. You have a lot more than you think. And what we do is we fixate on some things. And we neglect a lot of the other things we have, including people. We fixate on some things and we neglect to praise God for the many things we do have. And don't neglect those people that you have. There are people who love you, and there's people who want you, and you make them feel like they're nothing, and you minimize them because you fixate on so many other things. Man, can you allow some people back in your life who maybe you have pushed away because you just fixated on something that's wrong, something you don't have, and you don't often take stock of what you do have? Look at chapter 2, verse 1. It said, Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth, of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn. I don't know what I just said. And glean ears of corn after him in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said to her, go, my daughter. Okay, your life, if you think your life is over, all right, your life isn't over, but can you reestablish some level of normalcy? It won't be the same as it was, and initially you're going to feel like your normal is really inferior. But when Ruth asked Naomi about doing the beggar's work, I think Naomi realized, well, someone's got to go out and work. It was time to get up and go work. And now, I wonder if Naomi worked. The Bible doesn't say. It doesn't say she did. It doesn't say she didn't, what she was doing all day. Because, this is Ruth's story for the most part, right? But in their household, they found a new normal. I am certain neither woman wanted to be a widow, but they pressed on. But she doesn't press on by herself. She presses on with Ruth, including the people in her life. And if you're someone who's just struggling with getting your life back, how long are you going to go it alone? Something we talked about 3 weeks ago about letting people walk the path with you, but how long are you going to neglect who's there? How long are you going to neglect the opportunities that are before you? Because they just don't seem like they're as good as the ones you thought you once had. When the Bible says in Galatians 6:2, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. And maybe you're the one who needs help with your burdens. Maybe you're the one who needs to let people come alongside you and help. Look at verse 17, chapter 2. So she, Ruth, gleaned in the field until evening, and she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley, which you said is like 5.5, 6 gallons. And she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth, and she gave it to her after she had eaten, right? In verse 19, and her mother-in-law said to her, where have you gleaned today, and where did you work? Blessed be he that's acknowledged you. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought or worked, and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord, who has not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said to her, the man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen. All right? So, look, if you're a person who thinks that, man, like my life is over, it's not ever going to be what it was, it's not. I want to say a couple things here. One is, you can still grieve, okay? And you should still grieve. Naomi makes a statement, and it's very telling and touching, right? She says, wow. She says, Boaz showed kindness to who? The living and the dead, right? She hadn't forgotten Elimelech. She hadn't forgotten her sons. And to her, the fact that Boaz is doing something to take care of her and take care of Ruth, she looks at it as like kindness to her dead family, right? It's obviously on her heart. It's obviously on her mind. And that someone took notice of that made her glad. And in there, she mentions God. I don't think it's in vain. It's a big step, right? God's in her thoughts. She's not saying that God is kind. She's saying Boaz is kind. But still, there's just that spark. And here's another big step, too, which we kind of left off with last week, is that she started thinking about someone else. That's big. That's big because so often when we feel like our life is over, all we think about is ourselves. All we think about is what I don't have, what I gave up, the way things used to be for me. And here she is for the first time, starting to look, and she's not just thinking about poor old Naomi. She's thinking about Ruth. All right, those wheels start turning about Boaz marrying Ruth. Look at chapter 3, verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? Meaning, I'm going to marry you off. I got to figure out a way that you can get back into a family. And now is not Boaz of our kindred. with whose maidens you were. Behold, he winnows barley tonight in the threshing floor. And I'm going to talk all about this next week, okay? Like all the details and what this means culturally. And she said, wash thyself, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put your clothes on you, and get down to the floor. But don't make yourself known to the man till he shall have done eating and drinking. And it shall be, when he lies down, that you will mark the place where he shall lie, and you'll go in, and you will uncover his feet, and you'll lay down, and he will tell you what to do. And she said to her, all that you say to me, I will do. When Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment is, he said the first is what? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. And the second was to love your neighbor as yourself. And a strong element to our self-pity, and I don't know if I want to use that term, I don't mean it to sound bad, but when we're very focused on ourselves and what's going wrong in our lives, but a strong element to that is that we love ourselves, right? And we feel sorry for ourselves. But Christ, top two commandments, have higher priority, right? It is love God, and it is love others. And isn't a lot of sometimes like our grieving and our struggles and our feeling like our life is over is because we love ourselves. And we love the life we had. We love the dream we had. We love what we thought we could have been. We had this picture of what our life would be, and I don't have that. I remember being younger. I always remember thinking, like, I had this plan. I was going to, I graduated high school when I was 17. I turned 18 that summer, right before I started college. And I was going to graduate college in 4 years. And so I'd be 21, and sometime that summer, I would get married. And like when I was in high school, I had someone picked out who was going to be. And then by the time I was 30, I would have had 4 kids. That was my plan. I was going to have 4 kids. And so now I'm going to turn 46 this week, and so by now I'd probably have maybe a kid who would be married, maybe some kids in college, all that. It started going downhill when I switched majors and took me 5 years to graduate college. And then the girl who I was going to marry, we broke up. And then I dated someone else for a while. I was going to marry her. We broke up. And just kind of kept getting pushed off. And I didn't get married till I was 24, almost 25. And nothing has turned out like I wanted it. Like nothing. And it's just, sometimes the times in my life I've sat there when things weren't going good, and I've thought about it, and I've pitied myself, and you know why I did? Because I love me. And I love me more a lot of times than I love God, and I love me more a lot of times than I love other people. And God said, he didn't have to give that command. He's like, you already do that. He's like, but now you got to turn that into loving God, and you got to turn that into loving others, right? Jesus also said, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. For what is a man profited if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? There is a path back. And on that path, you stick with God, even when you don't feel like it. You stop blaming him, and you take some responsibility for your part. You got to stop sometimes and take stock of what he's given you. Especially, stop neglecting everyone else that he's put around you. It's a life where you start to see other people again and their needs and their purpose in your life and how maybe they can help you. You do for others once again. And you finally say, okay, I lay down my life to you, Jesus, and I pick up my cross. And what you're going to find is you will never, ever, ever make it back to the life you lost. Never. Not because there hasn't been restoration and growth, but because the life you had isn't the one God wanted for you. And you get to a point where you say, that's not the one I wanted either. You authored a lot of that life. And Jesus wants to author the new one. You defined success by very tangible things. But when you lose that life that you thought was over, and you pick up your cross and follow Jesus, you're gonna find that where you once defined success by very tangible things, now you're going to define it by that God was glorified, that you have love, that you have joy and peace and patience. And it will never, ever, ever be the same, but it will be better. Let's pray. God, thank you. Thank you for your word and its power and just the examples that you give us and you show us. And Father, I pray today that you would work on people's hearts and continue to long after we leave here. God, people who, a lot of struggles, a lot of hurt in our church, a lot of tears shed, a lot of anger vented. And I don't blame people for crying over the things they cry about or being angry over the things they're angry about. But God, I pray that you would show them the path back to restoration. Show them that everything they thought they had to have is not what you even intended ultimately, God. And give people that hope and that joy. And for your sake, I pray this. Amen.
All right, we're going to sing one more song, Oh, Praise the Name. We have words. Oh, there she is.
Oh, she's here. If you're someone who just feels hurt, like, God, this isn't the way I thought things would turn out. Would you take a moment and just tell him that and tell him how you feel? Even if you're angry, even if you're mad, it's okay to do. Are you a person who you may not feel like, you may feel like my life is okay, but are you a person who needs to stick to some things that you have let go concerning God and walking with him? Would you confess that to God? Maybe it's church, maybe it's prayer, maybe it's Bible reading, maybe it's caring about other people in church, whatever it may be. Have you stopped? Have you been neglecting the people around you? Would everyone here take a moment and ask God, who's someone who maybe I've neglected and maybe I should do something to help them? Would you pray that? And lastly, maybe you're someone here who's just got to say, you know what? I have not picked up my cross and been okay with everything. And today I just want to tell the Lord that I yield, I submit, I get that this is the way it is, and I'm going to move forward with you from here on out. If that's you, would you take a moment and talk to God about that? Now, God, I ask that you would help us, as there are people who I know, and I'm sure there's people sitting here who I don't know, that they needed a sermon like this. And I pray, Father, that you would bring restoration to a lot of people and healing. I pray, Father, that you would help people just to take the little steps of consistency, the little steps of thinking of others, these things that we so easily cast off because we're so consumed by us, by ourselves. And God, I ask that you would transform people in our church, that they be very others-oriented, very oriented towards picking up their cross. And God, I pray for some people here, you'd help them to forgive themselves for what happened. I pray, Father, that you would remind them and assure them that if they're saved, of how Jesus' blood, his death covers it all, God. And yes, there's hardships we have in life because of our sin, God, but there's purpose too. There's still purpose. And God, a lot of people in our church, would you remind them of that? Would you remind them of that right now? Would you remind them of that throughout the week? Would you remind them that there's no second-class citizens in heaven? God, that we're all on equal footing at the cross. Help our people, God. Amen.